Childhood dreams cast long shadows into a life, as if the strong feelings they stir prove their validity. Dreams propel the dreamer through in a different world. Which explains how I, a guy who grew up in a Florida beach town, find myself crouched beside a suffering sheep in an Appalachian pasture. "Richard, I think you should call the vet," says my wife. Kathy and I flank the ewe's prostrate body. Our third lambing has just begun this spring of 2001, and Red is in trouble. I'd found the little ewe in distress and had urged her up and nudged her inside an old shed where she'd collapsed and resumed straining, panting as if in labor. But nothing happens, no lambs, hour after hour. Kathy knows I'm reluctant to seek paid help. We're on a tight budget, and I'm trying to be a practical farmer, even if still part-time. Commercial shepherds do their own veterinary work, or they simply shoot and compost ailing ewes. Profit margins razor thin can't support farm calls. But Red, small and fine boned, with a roan patch on her neck, is a special case. She emerged 4 years ago from the anonymity of our rambunctious new flock by insisting on making herself our pet, surprising us and astonishing her wild flockmates. During an exhausting renovation of our farmhouse that summer, she'd sidle up every afternoon to be petted. As our other sheep stared at her in wide-eyed horror, Red mooned up at us with friendly, trusting eyes, charming us and lightening our cares. So I relent and call Maggie Swinson this Sunday afternoon. She arrives as heavy shadows from hickory and locust trees fall across the pasture. Maggie announces after a quick check that Red isn't dilated, and then she sits back with a puzzled frown on her elfin face. Red sure appears to be in labor. I mention ringworm, when a pregnant ewe comes to full term yet fails to dilate for delivery, which I've heard about in an email listserv for shepherds. Could be, Maggie says doubtfully, her short gray hair luminous in the shed's deepening gloom. I wonder if ringworm is even a recognized sheep ailment. There are so many, and I can't find it in my reference books. Or whether it's just more gossip from my virtual colleagues who keep me fretting about the endless woe that sheep are heir to. Should we load her up and bring her in, I ask. I don't see what good it'll do to bring her in. Maggie seems to be writing Red off, though she's too kind to say anything so harsh, and her attitude puzzles me as much as Red's condition does. Where's the help I'm paying for? Well, I say, if she hasn't delivered by tomorrow, maybe I should bring her in for a C-section. Maggie nods. Call first, she says. Then she shows us how to massage Red, which Kathy does for an hour without result, and we return to our house and our children in the mild April darkness. My father lost our farm in Georgia when I was 6, and I grew up in Florida fantasizing about reclaiming our land. Decades later, when our jobs took us here, to a place where we could buy a working farm, my boyhood dream resurfaced and carried me away. I'd said I wanted an adventure when we moved to this beautiful backwater, Appalachian, Ohio, from our comfy house in prosperous suburban Indiana. Yet the first thing I learned was that I didn't like starting over in a new place. It was hard and didn't suit my need for stability. And as a local acquaintance now jokes about such matters, it weren't easy. In early middle age, Kathy and I had returned to Ohio with 2 young children, not to the state's busy capital where we had met in graduate school 15 years before, but to Athens, a battered brick enclave in the state's remote southeastern corner. We were shocked. Athens seemed to have more in common with a village in dusty western Kansas than it did with long domesticated Ohio, a state of orderly farms dotted with big industrial cities. Just before moving, I had learned that Ohio had an Appalachian region, and upon arrival saw what that meant. Poor, tired towns, the land abused for decades by extractive industries, coal mining, timber cutting, natural gas drilling, the growing of erosive row crops like corn. I was horrified that we had traded our stable, affluent world for this pension place. We had moved only 6 hours east from Indiana, but had come so far. We couldn't know how far we had to go. We hadn't expected to find regional differences. We'd accepted the myth that America has been homogenized, scrubbed clean of wordy local distinctions by affluence, by shared television shows, and by broadcasters whose bland voices erode the patterns of proudly regional speech. Part of me was thrilled to discover there are still places in America, and for all its poverty and isolation, it was the most beautiful landscape I'd ever seen. In Ohio's hill country, a wrinkled shirt tail dangling untucked above West Virginia, everything felt different. The layered woods, the light flashing off petaled creeks, the wind in the trees, the wild phlox that bloomed pink beside shaded roadsides late in May. All we needed to make my dream come true, I vowed to myself after our disorienting relocation, was our own land. I pictured cattle lowing across a drowsy green valley in a sun-heavy afternoon, a red banty hen clucking in the barnyard dust. What I hadn't known as a daydreaming kid in Florida and couldn't foresee as a neophyte agrarian in Athens, buying land and livestock, was that my Eden could be so very complicated. All I knew, though I wasn't sure why, was that I had to act on my desire at last. When I was 16, browsing in a mall bookstore in Florida, I discovered paperback copies of Ohio writer Louis Bromfield's Pleasant Valley and Malabar Farm. They are two of the most romantic books ever written about American agriculture, but I didn't know that then. I saw their color covers, images of dewy green pastures and freshly turned black loam, and grabbed them off the rack beside the cash register. I was growing up in a tropical paradise, but grieving for our Georgia farm. Dad hadn't been able to earn enough from farming to support his growing family, and in 1961 he'd gone to work at the Kennedy Space Center during America's race to the moon buildup. He still received the Progressive Farmer, and I'd grown up paging through it. In a way that dry magazine never could, Bromfield's book showed me how I might redeem the loss of our farm. A similar exile had shaped Bromfield's boyhood, but he had returned as an adult to recreate the realm where he had spent idyllic days. Pleasant Valley opens with the scene of him driving into a snowy valley, imagining the dreamy summer landscape he had known as a child. Quote, "What I saw was a spring stream in summer, flowing through pastures of bluegrass and white clover and bordered by willows. On a hot day, you could strip off your clothes and slip into one of those deep holes and lie there in the cool water among the bluegills and crayfish, letting the cool water pour over you while the minnows nibbled at your toes. And when you climbed out to dry in the hot sun and dress yourself, you trampled on mint, and its cool fragrance scented all the warm air about you." End quote. Sometimes, curled up with the chunky mass-market paperbacks in an overstuffed chair in our Florida room in Satellite Beach, I ached with my sense of loss.